And, hi guys, this is Paul N0T for the Front Range 6 Meter Group. And tonight we have Lance W7GJ, who's going to give us a play-by-play on his fun time that he had with the new Q65 protocol. And Lance, so why don't you take it away?
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for showing up. I know that this has been a busy day, and everybody's got busy schedules. Let me see if I can share my screen here. I'm going to try to do this. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. Golly, this has got to be a first. This was pretty smooth. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of this Q65 Pileup, which is a feature in the new WSJTX. And I'm very excited about it. And this the new version of WSJTX is scheduled to come out in the next few days. It's version 2.7. So keep an eye out for that. So with that, I'll just get started here. Let me see if I can advance the screen. Oh, no, I can't. Now I wonder why I can't do that. There we go. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to K1JT and his team. Joe has always been so dedicated to trying to develop weak signal things for VHF and UHF, and especially EME. And he's so receptive to making things better and better for that. And I just can't say how grateful I am. And we are so fortunate to have such a talented and dedicated individual on our team, basically. And he's just been fantastic. So it has sure done just a lot for EME and weak signal work. There's no question. And if you're into something like 6-meter EME, which I think 6-meter EME, as opposed to Paul's 1296 EME, which is like sitting here talking to each other, 6-meter EME is probably the hardest possible band to work EME on. And it would not have been possible at all without, or it wouldn't have been reasonable at all for, and it wouldn't have been possible for single Yagi EME DXpeditions without Joe's amazing work with WSJTX. So I am tremendously grateful, and all of us who have worked 6-meter EME are very grateful. And we're probably the biggest supporters for WSJTX because we wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. So you remember that 50 years ago, the first 6-meter contact on EME was made, and it was made with a kilowatt on both ends of 8 Yagi stations, and they were both aiming at moonrise at the same time, so they both had ground gain on each end. So that's another 12 dB right there in the ground gain. So I mean, it's just there are just amazing things that are possible now that weren't in the days before WSJTX. So on with the program here. He started with JT44 back in 2002, and I made my first digital contact on EME by working South Africa in 2002, and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. But then it got better and better, and JT65 has been traditionally the mode to use on 6-meter EME, and it uses a lookup process using calls that are in call3.text, and then these very effective two-tone messages for RRO and RR and 73. But I know there were a lot of complaints, especially out of Europe, that that's cheating using any kind of list to look up things. So Joe came out with Q65 a couple of years ago, and that always exchanges full call signs, and it doesn't rely on any lookup. So it's just really pressing signal processing to the limit, and it's really a wonderful innovation. However, to get the most out of it, you really need to know who you're trying to call and who you're trying to converse with. And it's in that way, it's just like JT65. Both of those methods were designed basically for one-on-one contacts. I'm sure at the time people didn't anticipate EME DXpeditions needing some other kinds of tools. And I've found that there were a few holes here in when it comes down to pileups. So why do we need a special pileup? Well, the optimization for the Q65-60-second modes was done, and Q65 pileup is applicable to Q65 60A, 60B, 60C, so it could be used up to 1296. And the reason that this was developed for the Q65-60 modes is because that's been shown to be the best mode for EME weak signal work. One of the things that it does here is that it handles multiple callers and their messages, which is something that both of the earlier modes really didn't do. And it's the first one to address a DXpedition pileup of EME callers. So just as a way of introducing Q65 here, these are just comparing JT65A, which used to be our standard for 6-meter EME, to the new Q65-60A, which as soon as it came out a couple of years ago, became the standard for 6-meter EME all around the world. But JT65A, the signals needed to be like minus 25 dB in a 2500 hertz bandwidth sort of signal strength. And then it would get another 3 dB from looking up in the call3.text file to see if the call and the grid matched up with what it was starting to receive. And then the two-tone messages were very, very easy to detect even by eye, even if they didn't decode by the computer, because you could see these two tones spread out at certain distances. Well, they were great if there was only one station there, but I can tell you that, when you have 10 or 15 people calling you and their sync tones line up with these different messages, it can cause, and it has caused, false decodes of the RRs, and so it's been very confusing with multiple callers. With Q65-60A, it's already 3 dB better than JT65A, just with no information from anybody. And if you insert the right call, you get another 3 dB, which is really huge when signals are right at the bare edge of perceptibility to start with. And if you average the signal, you can get another 3 dB. So, I mean, it's really a powerful mode. So on these recent DXpeditions, I used Q65 -60A instead of JT65. I used it in the Austral Islands, and which has been my best success so far, despite all the problems I had down there with equipment breaking and so on. I used it in the Marquesas Islands. KB7Q has used it on state activations when he was roving around on 1296. I used it in Mayotte from FH last fall, and KB7Q has used it from PJ2, and also ZS4TX used it on 2 meters when he was in Angola last year. And PA2CHR used it on 432 and 1296 when he was in Gibraltar last year. So we love Q65, but because of these things, decodes all the collars across the passband, just like in FT8. You can double click on the traces to provide additional sensitivity. The averaging that has been built into this recently is phenomenal because it averages just the individual collars on their own offset frequencies. So that's just an incredible innovation that was made. Originally, it just averaged the whole bandpass, but now each individual collar and their own offsets are averaged, which is great. Auto sequencing, which we've got now, just like we do in FT8. I mean, it's wonderful when you have to run outside in the middle of a QSO. I found that in Mayotte, it was great. I was replying to somebody. I ran outside to turn the antenna. I came back inside. The noise was too high. I had to run into the bathroom and find out my wife had turned on the LED light in the bathroom. I quick turned that off and handed her a flashlight, ran back to the rig just in time to get Rogers coming up in the auto sequence from a station. So, I mean, it was wonderful to have that auto sequencing. The fact that you get complete call signs in every sequence prevents any confusion. And so your contacts can be interspersed, which is fantastic, because if somebody kind of fades out, somebody else calls, and I can work them in the middle of a contact and then come back to the other contact and finish up with him. And there's never any question about who's sending reports to whom or who's getting Rogers. It's very, very handy. The wide graph provides great detail. I think it's been really improved since Q65 came out. And since it's narrower bandwidth, there can be more stations across the bandwidth. I've only used like up to 2.8 kilohertz with my SDR, but the program can use up to 5 kilohertz. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll open it up and just tell people they can call from 0 to up to 5,000 hertz, and I could copy them. We'll have to see. But right now, I'm just figuring on using 3 kilohertz again, but that's a great possibility. I mean, you could have tons of callers all at once. And then starting with WSJTX version 2, there's a 64-bit version, which is great for faster processing for 64-bit laptops. And it's also better for new callers who are previously not known and not in the call3.txt. And that happened to me when I was in the Austral Islands, and on my moonset, I had a bunch of callers from Eastern Ukraine. I'd never heard of these guys before, but there they popped up on my screen. So it was wonderful. So here's an example of Q65 that from FH when I was there last September. And you can see all the different traces here of callers. And I think there's 7 of them here right at this moment that are decoded. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in this particular sequence. And I've had this is when it's my moon set, and it's also moon rise in North America. So it's a particularly hectic time. And it was also moon set in Europe, which is why FF1IDQ is calling at the same time that these people out west are calling. And I'm trying to get everybody in there in a very short period of time before I lose their ground gain lobes and before I lose my ground gain lobes. And the clock is ticking and the moon is moving and it's waiting for nobody. And I was very, very frustrated that I didn't work more people, because it just was very, very tough to be at the opposite ends of the world. And that was what I found with Q65. I couldn't go fast enough. So what I found was I needed a faster contact rate when there's a pileup. And especially if you're going to be on the opposite side of the world and you're going to be trying to work a lot of horizon only people during their moon ground gain lobes. And so I told Joe, I said, it worked for me, but I need, next time I'm going to be using the contest mode. So we just exchanged grids, so that can go a lot faster. And so I think he saw that as an opportunity, or maybe he'd already been thinking that, because there were wheels turning on his end. Another problem that I had with trying to have people send reports if they copied me and not send reports if they didn't copy me was that every time they changed their message, their average would get screwed up. And then whenever I changed a message, their average would get screwed up. So the averages got all screwed up. However, in the contest mode, the messages are constant. And so their averages, I would get the full benefit of the averages, the extra gain from the averages. So that's why I decided to go with the contest mode on the next DXpedition. What would really help is to know who the callers are for the extra 3 dB. I don't have time in a single sequence to guess who the dozens of callers might be and type their name, their calls and grid squares into the program and decode again to see if a certain trace might be that station. Well, that is something that Joe has fixed. And that was one of the downsides of losing the call3.txt lookup, was that you can't use the a priori and get the extra 3 dB if you don't have an idea who the callers might be. And ideally what we would have is we would know who is copying right at that moment, so we could make a quick reciprocal contact. And that's what we were talking about a little bit before this started, is that that's why I was so excited when Joe said in his presentation that he thought that there might be a way to do that in Q65, but not in the near future, but eventually, because if that happens, then you can easily work people and have reciprocal contacts, so they could work like in a minute or 2 minutes, and it would be really super. So Q65 Pileup addresses all of these problems except for the last one so you still don't know who is copying right at that particular time. But other than that, everything is fixed. The exchanging of the grids only eliminates the confusion with the averages. It adds the sensitivity, and it makes contacts faster. It provides full sensitivity of 3 dB. For anybody who's in this new active stations list, which is part of the Q65 Pileup feature. So, and with the averaging, that means that you can decode callers way weak, down to another 3 dB weaker. So the active stations list provides information on up to 40 callers, as long as you have decoded them once in the previous 24 hours. So basically, it's like a call3.txt file that you're making yourself, which is not a problem, really, I don't think, because sooner or later, I'm going to decode somebody sometime. It's just a question of then identifying that caller later and trying to complete with that station later. Once they're decoded and they're in the active stations list, I get basically full sensitivity on any calls or any subsequent contact exchanges with that caller. And it removes them from the active stations list after they're logged or after they run out of moon. So for an EME DXpedition, this is really a great tool. So here's an example of how well this North American VHF contest mode works here. I mean, it's so fast. I mean, basically, the contact is good when one station receives final Rogers. And so somebody might not know that I've received final Rogers until I upload the logs at the end of the day, or maybe I'll send them a 73. But when I move on to the next person, it's probably a good indication that I've received final Rogers. So here, for example, I would be calling CQ and I have a bunch of people calling me. So I pick one and I've already got his grid square. So I just send Roger in my grid square. And when he sends final Roger, that next time I can move on to the next person, call him, move on to the next person, call him, move on to the next person, call him. So it can be very fast, which I really like when we have the moon rise across the central United States and there's 15 people all have ground gain at the same time. It's very hectic. This is what the Q65 Pileup active stations list screen looks like. All the callers that you have accumulated in this active stations list are listed by their offset frequency, which is really handy, especially, because I'm continually watching that band pass to see all the little traces. If I see a little trace and I wonder who it is, I can just look here and see, oh, it's probably HB9Q. You can either double click on the trace or just double click on his call sign here in the active stations list, and it'll load him up, load his grid into your program and call him. So it's very handy. And it also shows me what the elevation of his moon is. So I can also see, oh boy, I better call this guy here because his moon is disappearing faster than these other people. And that's really helpful when you see somebody in Europe, for example, whose moon is 3 degrees and you see that it's only 0 degrees for somebody in Chicago. So I've got probably like 2 minutes to work this guy in Europe before the ground gain lobe kicks in for the guy in Chicago. So you can kind of prioritize here using the elevation too. So that's very, very handy feature. So this is just an example of what it looks like on the screen. This I just loaded in some test examples that I had. So the date and the elevations and stuff really aren't working right, but you can see that here I had decoded these stations here. A bunch of them have been removed from the active stations list, but I have WA3QPX still in the active stations list over here. And it shows his moon is at 7 degrees. You know, and then I have the window up for the astronomical data so I can see what my elevation and azimuth are for the moon. And then you have the waterfall here, and I don't really see any good stations here on right at the moment, but that's basically what it looks like. So some of the testing of Q65 Pileup have been on the air. W7GJ, which is K1JT using the club station back there on 1296, did a bunch of tests with it in February, and I did tests with it March 18th on 2 meters, and then I did tests on March 22nd with twice as many stations on 6 meters to simulate a pileup. CY0S on their 2 meter EME DXpedition in March this year used it. That's all they used was this Q65 Pileup. And I'll be using it on my next DXpedition from 3B9 in a couple months. So as I said before, it's coming in WSJTX version 2.7, along with other enhancements to in the decoder, which improve, fine-tune a lot of things, and fine-tune the bandpass and the red spike to show where the callers are and so on. And that's expected out on May 12th. So that's two more days. So just remember, even with a single Yagi aimed on the horizon, you can work an EME DXpedition station when your moon is near the horizon using ground gain. It's a very, very powerful tool. To work a DXpedition using Q65 Pileup, you just run in Q65-60A mode and call using either Q65 Pileup, or you can use an earlier version of WSJTX using a digital contest mode like NA North American VHF contest mode. That's fine, but you can use Q65 Pileup if you want. Full instructions on how to work the DXpedition are on my webpage. And good luck in DX. And my 18th 6 meter EME DXpedition will be from 3B9GJ starting Labor Day weekend. And this is where I've chosen to set up and operate. And you can see the red shaded area shows the azimuths where I will have ground gain over the water. during my moonrise and moonset. So I expect to have, at least I hope to have, some pretty darn good gain on my end to go along with ground gain on the North American end. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't, Lance, this is Rick. I don't have any specific questions, but other than, have you tried using the reference spectrum option? Where you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did try that once, and I found that I don't need it with the SDR that I use for my receiver. I don't need to have a corrected spectrum. I've got a flat band pass now with the SDR.
Okay, because I have an IC746 Pro, and it appears that the reference spectrum improves things by flattening out the pass band. Let's see. You showed the picture of the wide graph where you had chosen Q65 sync, where it shows the red line. Is there any reason to go back to a screen like that and make sure people know what that is and what it's telling us?
Well,
or have you talked about that?
It's in Q65 there are several ways that you can get a decode, and you can I guess let's see it. Well, I could go back and show you, but do you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see if I can go back.
Okay. While Lance is going back, in case anybody is interested, Richard Allen was one of the people involved in the first amateur 6-meter EME. And if you go to rcallen.com, it shows he's got several pages and pictures of his setup. I'm sorry. Okay, so my point is the red line is because you have Q65 sync turned on.
That's right. And so you can't see it here because I've covered up the bottom of the bandpass with these other screens, but yeah, I have chosen the Q65 option for displaying the screen. And you know, the decoder will decode as best it can all these callers down here that are calling in Q65. But if there's a weak trace that is not decoding, there will be a red sync, and often there's a really strong orange sync line here where those callers are. And if you double click at those spots, you'll get additional dB. It'll go into a deep decode mode, deep search decode mode, and there's a much better chance of decoding as long as you have this f-tall very narrow. And I usually keep this f-tall on the screen at 20 hertz. So you can see that it's very narrow, and it's on this station down here, which is somewhere around 300. Let's see. And that's the F1 IXQ station that I'm trying to work right now. So that's why I have at that particular time, I had my narrow tall down here, and I had double clicked on it. So what has been one of the things that has been improved in this new version 2.7 is the red spikes have become easier to spot. I always suggest to be, and I have this on my web page too, how to set up for Q65, but I always suggest changing the speed of the waterfall, which is, there's a little setting called N average for progressing the speed of the waterfall, and I change it to 20 for these minute-long Q65 sequences. And it really brings out the very, very weak traces. The faster you run it, the stronger the trace has to be spotted. Now, I'm sure like Paul on 1296, he can run it like at like 3 or something and have just 1 or 2 sequences appear on the bandpass, and he can see these very strong traces. But, you know, on 6 meter EME, things are very, very weak. And so we need to average out as much time as we can to see this little trace here so that it shows up, so you can identify where these people are. But I explained that again on my Q65 setup on my web page.
Hey, Lance?
Yeah.
Just a quick question this is Paul. You're talking about your active stations list, which is going to be new in the new Q65. And
right.
I guess I'm just confused. I thought I heard you say I needed to have worked you in the last 24 hours. So I'm not sure how I get onto the list. if you're a 3D9, if you know what I'm saying.
But there's no way for me to manually put you on the list. The list is formed as I decode callers. And once I decode a caller, they stay on the list for 24 hours or until their moon sets or until I get them in the log. And then it removes them from the active stations list. So it's from once I decode somebody, it's kind of like call3.txt. It's like a lookup, and they have the full the extra 3 dB of sensitivity automatically when I click on a trace or something like that. I don't have to, you know, one of the things that was just so frustrating with this Q65-60A was, okay, as long as I'm working F1 IDQ, this is fine, and this is no problem. But say I wanted to work this guy, and I don't know who he is, and I double click on him, and it doesn't decode. Well, it could be this guy. It could be W9JN, or it could be this guy. It could be W5EME. So I could try to manually type in their calls and put their DX grid in here, and then click decode again and see if I can get this trace to decode. That would give me like 3 dB if I hit it right. But I don't have the time to try to guess who's calling me and put in all those call signs. That's what the active stations list does automatically for me now. So it's a tremendous aid. You can't believe how frustrating it was for me in FH to have these callers all across the screen during my moonset. And I keep trying different calls and they're not decoding anybody, you know, and I don't know who any of these traces are. And so the fact that
I see 2 things that does. One is you don't have to manually update the list. As soon as you decode somebody during whenever the past 24 hours, it's in the list. And it's not in the list unless they've been decoded, which answers the complaints about call 3 lists everybody, and so
exactly. That's exactly right. And
so
the chances are pretty pretty good that I will decode somebody somewhere along the line, though, before I try to work them, that I will decode them, because I've asked everybody to call the whole time if they see me, to call me, try and be calling me whenever they can, and stay on their frequency, because whatever frequency they pick to transmit on, they need to stay on it, because I'm averaging all the callers on that particular offset frequency. It doesn't do, I can't average them if they move all over the place, but if they stick there and call a bunch of times, I will probably decode them at some point.
Yeah. So Lance, so if you hear me on the 28th, but we don't work, but you've decoded me once, and then on the next day, if it's within the 24 hours, if you hear me again, it'll decode me quicker, and I'll be able to work you faster. Is that right?
No,
Wow.
no, you got to start from scratch again the next day. That's the trade-off here with that Rick was talking about. I mean, it's not like a call 3.txt that the information's there all the time. It's really there because you really did call me, and I really did copy you. So I mean, but the trade-off in having a really confirmed contact is that, yeah, it has to be every day. But on the other hand, I probably will have a pretty good idea if you're going to stay on the same offset and I see you there the next day. I'll probably have an idea who that might be. But if you call a few times and stay on that frequency, it'll average your calls, and you will pop up and go to the active stations list. So I think there's a really good chance that we can do it.
Sounds good.
And especially with that ground gain you've got.
Hey, Lance, I have a question. W9JM, do you hear me?
I can hear you, John.
Okay, very good.
You were one of the reasons I was so frustrated on this last trip. I'd see you from time to time, and I'd call you, and you wouldn't hear me. And I mean, it's really so difficult to know how the Faraday is working on both ends.
Something about grenades and is close enough, right? Anyway, the question I have, please, is what would be a minimum antenna for a horizontal, for a ground gain for a no elevation, and what would be maybe minimum power output, please?
Oh boy. Well, I think the minimum station that I worked last time was PA5Y. He had a 6-element LFA, I think. But he has great ground gain being in the Netherlands. And, it might as well be over the ocean. I mean, it's really super. And I think he was running at least a kilowatt. So
he's a little bit farther away from the sea, Lance.
Oh, I know, but it's just so beautiful and so flat there and so moist.
It's flat there. That's absolutely true. But I think he's at least 50 kilometers from the sea.
Yeah, well, he was not pointed at the sea when we worked either, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think it was on his moonrise, but I've always had good luck with these folks up in the Netherlands and in Belgium and Denmark. The land up there is, and in Finland too. Usually in Finland, the ground is very, very flat and wet and works great for ground gain. But I had a terrible time with Finland from FH, and I'm not sure why. I think part of the problem was that the K index was 7 for several days while I was there, which certainly interrupted things. And that could have affected us too, John. I mean, I don't know. I had some real sessions where I had one-way propagation.
Lance, this is Jim Miller.
So Jim, hold on just a second. I don't know if I finished answering John's question, but I think I would try to get a good 7-element beam in at least a kilowatt. Usually the people with 6M9 KHWs and a kilowatt, I usually always copy them even if they're elevated. But the smaller antennas that definitely need the ground gain and certainly as much power as you can muster. The smallest antenna I've ever worked on one of these DXpeditions was I can't remember his call anymore, but he was looking out over the Chesapeake Bay with a 5-element M² Yagi and 1500 watts. So you can see as the gain of the antenna goes down, we really need to rely more on some power and on the ground gain.
In conjunction with that, thank you, Lance. In conjunction, are there better preamps? Okay, I know there's 2 major preamp companies. One is you use ARR, and is that a preamp modified to make it better, or is it just a run of the mill and you had it set up for your radio? Maybe you can explain that, please.
Yeah, I modified it, but the only reason I modified it was to break out the preamp. The preamp that I had from ARR is one that they don't make anymore. It was built to transmit 160 watts through it, as if you were using it on top of an antenna or something. So I just put it between my transceiver and the amplifier, and I modified it to break out a separate receiver, and that's what goes to my SDR. It goes to a filter, and then my SDR. It's very similar to the little boxes that N2 EME makes. His little breakout boxes. Martin's got something he's showing there. Is that an ARR preamp or some other kind of preamp, Martin?
It's a HA8ET preamp. And that should work pretty well.
Oh, yeah. So you can get them from Hungary or...
Yeah, I don't know if
here...
I don't know if you still can get them, because I think that guy is SK, the silent key.
Oh no. Well, ARR is a good choice, but here at home I use a Hamtronics preamp. They don't make them anymore, but I didn't do anything to improve it, John.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jim, you had a question.
Yes, with this 2.7 coming out for us at home, where the hound's chasing you, what sort of practice sessions might we participate in to do our best? Is there anything planned?
I hadn't thought about that, but
Lance, I have one comment. Remember, guys, that you can get 4 or 5 people in the same room with laptops and just do audio, speaker out of your laptop and the microphone on your laptop, and one guy can be the fox and the other guys can be the hounds. It works fine. No radios required, but you get to learn how to run the software.
But really, Jim, there's not a whole lot of difference in 2.7 in how to use it with the fact that I will be using Q65 Pileup. I mean, you can use it if you want to, but it really doesn't make any difference. As long as you select like North American VHF contest mode, or you can select Q65 Pileup. It's just that we will be exchanging grids. And it's just like when you run the June VHF contest, for example, and you're exchanging grids on FT8. I mean, it's basically the same sort of exchange and the same thing.
Okay. Thank you.
You don't need the active stations list because you're going to be calling me.
Of course.
So I need to have the active stations list so I can figure out who the callers are, but you will always be trying to call the DXpedition station, and there will be some other DXpeditions to some rare places. I have some pretty good feeling this year that'll be using Q65 Pileup. So yeah, but it'll be easy from the caller's end.
Thank you.
Hey,
You
Lance, hey, Lance, what SDR and software are you going to use?
I always just take my AirSpy R2 and I use it with SDR console.
Great, thanks.
And that's the same that's the same as I'm taking in the car across country on this grid trip in 2 weeks too. I mean, it's I like the band pass on it, and I like the fact that that it has a good noise blanker if I need a noise blanker, which is especially useful in the car. I may or may not have a noise problem where I am in 3B9. I hope I don't. I don't think I will, but you know, I'm kind of remote, but at least I've got SDR console's noise blanker in case I do. So that's the receiver setup. So anyway, in conclusion, Joe has been very receptive to this DXpedition issue with Q65, and you know, we all need to be so grateful to him and his team for the responsiveness on this. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, hey Lance, it's Tim. I have a thought.
Yes.
First, I'd like to compliment you on your documentation that you have on your website, where you kind of try to put together information that shows people examples and, you know, how to kind of work with you in this pileup situation. One observation that I have that you might want to consider is perhaps putting in a use case that shows what happens and how you treat a QSO where there is a busted reception. So the guy didn't get your R and you move on. I mean, I think there's some room for confusion here because I mean, you kind of stated it yourself, and you said that, hey, Q65, you know, this thing works great. I can interlace QSOs. And then on the other side of the coin, you said, well, you know, it moves so fast, I can basically not send the 73. And so now you have a whole set of people out there that miss something, which happens frequently, and they don't know. And now they're removed from the active station list, and because they're in your log, and you know, people get frustrated. So you might want to consider, you know, clearing that behavior, you know, what you're going to be doing, just so that people don't, you know, minimize that frustration, because I've seen it in previous situations, and you know, I think maybe we could do a little better there.
Yeah, I understand. There haven't been that many cases where there's been any confusion or question, but like I said, I always make sure to update the log every day at the end of the pass on the internet, so that they can see the list of stations worked and make sure that they're in the list of stations worked. If they're not, then they can call again. But
Yeah, my concern is
Uh,
you get
if-
into a place where you can't update those logs. And, like it would have
Yeah.
been, we're on, maybe ZD9 or something like that, or Spratly or whatever. Hint, hint.
yeah, I know. Well, I'll just do the best I can. I mean,
Yeah, I mean-
if there's any possibility, I'll keep sending Rogers to him until until he replies with a 73,
Right.
or
I mean, and
he
maybe
can send Rogers.
that's the answer. I mean, maybe you'll say, well, I will, I kind of guarantee I'll send you at least 2 Rogers or at least 3 Rogers and before I'll move on. It's like, I mean, the thing that you're kind of getting here is speed, but on the other hand, it might have a negative to it, in the event of Faraday rotation and stuff like that.
Right. It certainly, if there's no reason to move right on, I won't. And in the past, what I have done is just hang with the station until it's clear on both ends, with a 73 or something that it's safe to move on. The only reason I would move quickly is if we're in a really tight time crunch, like I've run into on these moon sets. For example, from 3B9, with the west coast of the United States, I've got like a half an hour to work anybody west of the Rockies. And so it's going to be hot and heavy during those periods. I'm going to try to work as many callers as I can, but and it's also my moon set, so I'll have nulls in my ground gain lobes too. So it's going to be a challenging situation, but yeah, I will. Thanks for the suggestion. I'll definitely try to keep making it clear as I can, and certainly at this location, I will have internet in 3B9, so I will try to during a transmit period or something. I'll probably try to send N0TB tanks and then go back to the computer screen.
Yeah,
but
So Lance, is 2 minutes about as short a time as you can spend with a given station? I mean, while you're calling them and waiting for their response, and everything else is overlapped. You've got 5 people you've decoded and you're calling one.
It depends, Rick. Sometimes, if it's not a crunch situation like this, I may only have one person on the screen, and I may be able to spend an hour with them. From FH, I spent hours trying to work a JA station every day. I tried for hours, and we were just seemed to be locked out. There was an OH station like that too, and I didn't see anybody, and I'm trying to keep myself awake and still call him, and there was nobody else there, and it was just, we were locked out. And
So if you have a 30-minute moonrise or moonset time, is that 15 stations, or do you work more than that in any given 30? I mean, what's the most you might work in a
you know, typically during a moon rise and a moon set in the past, I've worked like 5 stations.
Okay,
I'm hoping now with the contest mode, to be able to go faster, but we'll see. It also depends on having reciprocal signals with both stations. And you know, if I'm hearing 3 stations, and this is what happened in FH, and I try to call one, still nothing. I try to call the second one, still nothing. I try to call the third one, still nothing. You
okay,
know, it's a tough situation to decide. Well, then what do? Do you go back and start working through the list again? Or that's why I'm hopeful that Joe will actually put in the indicator that would just show up on my active station screen as a red dot or something that would indicate that N0TB copied me in the last sequence.
okay. That
And
answers
so
my question.
he's a good candidate for a quick contact, and then I can go back to an hour of calling somebody else, you know. But yeah, it's still not a sure thing. It's you know, and this is one of the things that kind of rubs me wrong when people say, oh, well, this moon bounce thing, that's not a challenge. That's a sure thing, you know, for 6 meters, you know. Well, they obviously have not done one of these deals because there's no sure thing. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, but we try to make it work for everybody as best we can.
Cool.
And Martin, I don't know, you know, we're both going to have problems on both our ends, probably, especially now because we're both going to be in the TEP zone. And this is just a horrible situation because there's always high electron content where you don't want to have it.
Yeah, luckily I already worked 3B9 on I think on F2, so.
Oh, excellent. Good. We got you out of the way then.
I will give way to others, unless it might be a very clean copy if I have my array ready by that time.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing that I'm very, very grateful to him for making so many. I mean, since I planned this trip, he all of a sudden has come up on 6 meters and done a great job on F2 and TEP. And so a lot of the stations that are within TEP's range of the TEP zone have already worked him. He's made some tremendously long contacts. So I think he worked 3D2 AG or something, didn't he? Or you know,
I would be
he's
surprised.
worked halfway around the world. So with his 70 watts. So I'm hoping that that'll take some of the pressure off. And
I know that a lot of guys here in the Caribbean already worked 3B9.
Excellent.
Lance, Chris, N4SIX.
Hi, Chris.
Has there been any talk with Joe about incorporating some of the Fox Hound capabilities where you're actually transmitting signals to 2 stations simultaneously?
You know, that people usually don't copy me well enough for me to be able to do that. I mean, I can run if the SWR is good, I can run 1500 watts output with my portable amplifier now. But I don't think that for most people, they need every dB that I can give them. And for me to split my signal twice or 3 times to lower my power to each of those individuals, I just don't think I could do it. What I really consider to be the foxhound mode of 6 meter EME would be if I could get an indication who's copying me on a particular sequence. And when I see that pop up from somebody, that's the sign to me to go to them right away, quickly make the contact, and then go back to working somebody else. And especially with Q65, you can easily do that because you got complete calls with each sequence. So there's usually no question who's getting the Rogers and who I'm working. But that is my dream for what a foxhound mode would look like on 6 meter EME. The signals are just too weak to.
But
to
you are
split up.
assuming that you have to run multiple streams, and I don't know if that's a valid assumption. I mean,
Well, that's what it's
it-
been so far.
Yeah, I mean, it may be the way it's coded today, but I don't think that there's any. I mean, this is all just programming, Lance. I mean, you can basically make this protocol whatever you want it to be. And if somebody wanted to invest the resources to make the protocol specific to Q65 to transmit multiple call signs on a single stream, it can be done. I'm sure that's the case, but it's just a matter of, who wants to spend the time to do it, or if it's really a good use case or whatever.
Yeah, that's part of the issue is the way that it's been designed now, and that's what Joe talked about on his presentation earlier today. In fact, is how they do the error correction and how they do the multiple being able to repeat the messages and so on, and send all the information. So if I'm sure that you could compromise on the sensitivity of the mode if you had enough power to be able to get the signal out, you could intersperse it with other call signs and so on. But that's a pretty complicated change too, but that may be possible someday. And
Yeah, the code is there. They do it already, but it's just a question of how easy is it to adapt it and modify it to our specific needs. Because it does send, foxhound mode today does send multiple calls in a single frame. But that's also, there are technical reasons why that dialect might not allow for a single stream for a complete QSO, where it kind of gets forced to break out to 2 streams, just because, like, for instance, you can't send RR73 in one frame. And so
right,
there's technical issues that would have to be addressed. It's not super simple, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, one thing that I'm certainly highly aware of is that 6 meter EME is a pretty narrow niche right now.
Yeah.
And compared to the 40,000 users that use WSJTX, there might be 100 or 200 callers on one of these 6 meter EME DXpeditions. And but we'll see as it grows what the needs are and what the demand is from the users, and you know, maybe more things will evolve. But like I said, the top thing on my wish list right now is to be able to identify people who are copying me right now, and we'll see if that, you know, I may have to rely on the internet for that.
Hey,
But,
Lance.
but I can't be everywhere at once. Yes, John.
Okay, I got a question. You're talking about a wish list. Is it appropriate to ask now, how are you doing financially for these trips?
Well, I haven't collected a lot of money for the 3B9 trip so far. I'm hoping that I can get a little further along on it, because on that end of it, because this is a pretty expensive one. But I didn't really expect to be able to collect the same amount that I did for some of the last couple trips, because a lot of people have already worked 3B9, as Martin said. A lot of Europe has already worked it on TEP. Yeah, there's still guys in Finland and Scandinavia that are anxious to work it, but there's a lot of the Europeans already have it, and so I knew that this is going to be more of a heavy lift on my end to put this on, and I also didn't expect to get a whole lot so far, because I haven't really confirmed that I've got a license yet to anybody. And I had hoped to have the license in hand by now. They told me that everything was approved to send them the money, and I sent them lots of money, and they said, "We got your money." And so I've sent them a couple of emails saying, "So where's my license?" But you know, I'm sure it'll be forthcoming. So, you know, I haven't made any more announcements yet about that, but we'll see what happens when I make the next announcement, which will I'll probably wait until I get the license, and then I have to have the license before I can set up the LOTW thing, location, and so on. So I want to try to do that all in advance as well. I'll tell you where I really I hope people come through is on the ZD9 thing. If that really comes through, that's going to be an expensive one. It's really expensive to stay there, and it's really expensive to get there. So that'll be
That's not happening this year, Lance, is it?
no, I'm on the waiting list for next year, now that they booted me out of my ship berth for this year.
Right.
I had hoped to go there this year, but I just it wasn't in the cards. So does anybody else have any questions or comments? Or I don't want to keep you all here too late.
Lance, I had one more that you said, and is there any one thing that callers should make sure that they do, whatever way they operate? The one thing I heard was pick a frequency and stay there, or pick an offset and stay there.
Right. And call a lot. So I can I can hear you. I can see you and average your signal, decode you at some point.
So how many stations do you think you can fit into a 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth? You know, if everybody stays on a constant frequency and nobody moves.
You know, I think I figured like 20 before, but I could, I can receive up to 5 kilohertz with WSJTX and with my SDR. So if there were a huge number of people calling, I mean, I could, receive over that wide a bandwidth. I'm not sure it's necessary for 3B9 though, because as Martin pointed out, I mean, a lot of people have already worked it. So I don't think I'm going to have the same pile up problems as I had.
Probably not.
Like with FH or some of these other places, but as long as everybody tries to spread out, I don't think it'll be a problem. And the Q65 is really, really good for actually signals being on top of each other or intermixing and having the decoder subtract out one station and then decode again and see that there's another station underneath, and then decode again and subtract that out and see that there's another station was underneath. So I mean, ideally, it would be great to have everybody spread out nice and clean like they are in this picture that's on the screen now. But even if there's a little bit of overlap, I think the way the programming is done and the software is just remarkable and does a wonderful job.
Historically, at least from what I've seen, ON4KST, the EME page, there's usually a pretty active activity there of people maintaining a nominal spread out list that's worked in the past. Is that what you'd expect this time as well?
Yeah, ideally that would be great, and it doesn't have to be real fancy. But I noticed in when I was in French Polynesia, the limit to the size of the posts on the ON4KST page limited the number of entries that could be made on people's frequencies and stuff. So, I think rather than you could use shorthand for like saying
I think I hear a future request to enhance the packet size on KST.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? But also the postings can be shorter too, so they can be like, if I'm saying, well, W7GJ will be transmitting at 800 hertz, it could just be 8. And if somebody's going to be transmitting at 8.5, they could just say N0TB 8.5, something like that, rather than filling up the whole message with lots of zeros that nobody needs to have in there. I mean, we can pack more information in there.
Maybe it's enough to only use suffixes.
Yeah, that could work too. Except, if I have to, well, I don't know that I will be able to keep track of that.
Although on my screen I would see a collision with 2 GJs.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thanks, Lance, and I think you covered just about everything we could think of tonight, and I really appreciate you spending the time with us and putting all this.
Thank you, Paul.
Together. And I'll record this, or I am recording it, so I'll post it on our YouTube page. If somebody wants to review it, or if you have some friends that missed it tonight, they want to see it, it'll be on our Front Range 6 Meter YouTube page. So thanks again for everybody. Just an FYI, ZL 1 RS is coming in pretty good into Colorado. So just worked them again. Anyway,
Let me just have a look.
You
if I
guys
see
have
him as
all
well.
the propagation.
yeah, well, you know, it's the ground gain, right?
It's also your geomagnetic latitude, but
Yeah, that helps sometimes. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Have a great night.
thanks
We'll,
again.
See y'all.
Yeah.
See you guys. Thanks.
Good night.